Well, Linus, thank you so much for helping with my project. Could you say a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. I think as I mentioned, I am a pharmacist. I have not, I don't, I'm not too caught up in the space race, but I've dabbled in a lot of fiction and nonfiction things relating to space, and that's the extent of my knowledge. But I'm not, I do see things on the news time to time about the goings on of that. So. My background is in healthcare, so it's not really space related.
So, how have you seen healthcare change since you got into the profession?
Have I seen healthcare change? Well, healthcare is pretty dynamic in the sense that I mean, um, there's a lot of innovation involved. I mean, it's going more toward automation. I would imagine a lot of the technology being created in healthcare can probably be attributable to a lot of the technological developments in space. uh, you know, but automation, we came from an area where it was very analog to now it's gotten to be very digital to where, there's increased automation, at least in my field.
Um, well, that's interesting. Do you see a time whenever patients maybe go to like a vending machine to get their prescriptions filled, or what do you think?
Well, I think there is. Well, right now they currently use a vending. Not to debase the whole structure of things, but in hospital systems they use a vending machine type system for nurses to obtain medications for patients. I won't mention the name, but there's several of them out in the market. But that's already in play now. As far as a patient going to a vending machine to get medications, like in a retail setting, I think there's already talk about that. If I've heard correctly, Mark Cuban uh, has talked about that, and even Jeff Bezos with his project, his endeavors into healthcare.
It's interesting, and it seems like in terms of pharmacists, the real value you uh, provide is around the consulting. The actual understanding the different drug interactions and
Hmm.
the kind of like the patient's unique uh, kind of situation and what their unique problems are, and kind of prioritizing and making those risks trades, like we could do this, but then that type of thing. I was just wondering how much of the time you get to spend doing those types of things.
Well, that's kind of tricky because every field has got its challenges. I've worked in a retail setting. I worked in a hospital setting. In the retail setting, theoretically, that's supposed to happen, but it doesn't happen because the focus a lot of times has been on the metrics, about the numbers, about how many patients you can get fill the prescription, and you don't really get the time that you want to. It's like going to your doctor's office. You only get to spend maybe 2 or 3 minutes with your doctor, and then he's on to the next patient and he's documenting. So it's even a bigger challenge with pharmacists because we're encouraged to do more numbers just get profit. In the hospital setting, you don't really get in touch with patients a lot. You do things behind the scenes. You consult with the doctors if there's anything wrong with the therapy. But I don't see that much happening. In theory, it should happen, but it's not happening. Um, I think with the advent of AI, uh, a lot of the things that pharmacists do in terms of consultation could potentially be replaced by AI. Um, uh, AI has gotten so good in their algorithms that something like what I do um, could very well be replaced.
And it's kind of interesting how I mean, especially like you see like these large language models like Chat GPT. I
Hmm.
mean, even things like trading contracts and kind of creating like business plans and stuff are is able to just churn out. It's almost like there's no area of human activity that's not ripe
It's
for
not
automation.
happening. Right. So, like in our field, like in order for me to provide information about therapy and everything, you can think of me as sort of like a data aggregator. I use various sources and I use those sources, bring it all together, and provide a reliable conclusion, or a reliable form of therapy or modality for the practitioner out there. Now, ChatGPT, I mean, even though it's in infancy, and I'm just using that as an example, there's other ones, even Bard. Google's got Bard, B-A-R-D out there, and there's some other ones out there. But they're primarily right now in a data aggregation phase. Now, whether they're correct or not, that remains to be seen. But there's a lot of aggregation of data, and it ultimately leads to a conclusion. Now, whether that's correct, yeah, now it's not so reliable, but I can foresee where it's going to be very, very accurate.
Well, I had some questions about the moon I wanted to ask you about.
Oh yeah, no. I was about to say, are you just going to ask me about healthcare? I mean, I thought we're talking about space here.
I'd like to, find out a little bit about each person.
Right.
I think it's good to kind of talk about that. But did you know that NASA's planning to send astronauts back to the moon?
I do. I am aware of that. I'm aware of several things of the moon. I know recently India landed on the South Pole, and they discovered some water out there, and that's supposed. And I know the Russians are the Russian mission. I correct me if I'm wrong. I heard it failed.
Yes.
And I know the United States is really gun ho about doing it too. So there's obviously an interest. I'm aware of that.
Well, what do you think about it in terms of us sending astronauts back to the moon and space exploration? I mean, is it something that really excites you, or do you have like questions about, is that really how we should be spending our resources?
I come from it from a role of cautious optimism. So with that, what I mean by the cautious optimism is that we cannot solve our problems here, but we're transferring. What we're doing is basically just doing a lateral move, and it seems like we're going to somewhere where the same problems are going to persist in terms of environmental consequences or some sort of consequence that'll affect that planet's I don't know if the correct term is geosphere or climate or whatever. So I think, we should use whatever we have to correct the problems here, and then possibly go out and venture afterwards. Because the money should be devoted primarily to saving our planetary resources, our environment, before we can venture out. But I'm excited about the exploration aspect, just to get a little to the point. But I think our resources should be devoted to helping our planet first.
And there's like 8 billion people on the Earth right now, which is like twice the numbers there used to be the first time we went to the moon back in 1969.
Mm-hmm.
How can we kind of liberate and make use of all that additional, brain power and capabilities to actually do, take care of the problems here on Earth, explore space, and just basically do everything that we could. It seems like we're not getting twice the human potential out of having twice the number of people.
Well, I look at it because I think ultimately we were talking about AI previously, and AI is a data aggregating tool. There's a wealth of research out there, and a lot of people have to use the internet and that sort of environment. There's a lot of documentation taking place. AI at this point could probably help to combine the resources and the knowledge base of people around the world to bring certain things like this into fruition, or to make things better. I don't know if we have an efficient way of doing it yet, but I think there certainly should be, if not already, a way to strive to have AI get that efficiently. Aggregate all that data, aggregate all that knowledge from the 8 billion people. Well, not all 8 billion are going to be relevant, but the ones that are really knowledgeable in this aspect should be able to collaborate, and AI should be able to aggregate it and provide a reasonable result. I think we should be able to work hand in hand in that way, if that makes sense. I don't know.
Yeah, it does. I mean, there's like kind of like a dependency on AI where you just basically ask it your bare bones questions, and you take whatever answer it gives blindly. And then you
Mhm.
sort of have like this coaching use of AI where it's like, teach me how to be better, and is my understanding correct, and what other things should I learn? I mean, it
Mhm.
seems like that we need to, and then other variations of that. That's some way to to have the interaction of AI make us better somehow instead
Right.
of weaker and
Of
dumber.
course. Yes. Of course.
But that's not human tendency, though. I think since the automobile was created, we've probably all become a little bit weaker in terms of our running and walking.
Well, I think that the problem is right now society has a problem with complacency. You're not. We have such a reliance on technology that you're not really taught to think. It's more of a group think model, and sometimes even the aggregation tools like Google, for example, you know, the searches are constructed to model a certain kind of thinking or to validate a certain kind of thinking. I don't know if there's any kind of net neutrality, if I'm using it correctly in these terms, to where when you search for something, it's really a very neutral position. I don't know, because there's advertising and things come into play. So that I think that kind of complicates things. If we had a very democratic system, it would be free from any kind of commercial bias. But unfortunately, people have to make money, and at the end of the day, money is kind of what makes things revolve. And if as long as we have that, and we have these biases, I don't think we can really get a true, subjective perspective of things.
Yeah, it's a challenge. Um, I mean, yeah, I don't see it changing. I just see it getting worse and worse. People getting more and more siloed in their areas.
Yeah, I mean, it'll happen, but as I said, it just we're a complicated species, so we have to, as I said, if in order to function, you have to come from a logical, non-emotional area, and I think that's where the AI component comes in. But not everyone can be like Spock from Star Trek. Let's put it that way. You understand that reference? He was completely logical. There's no emotion built into his line of thinking.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Indeed. Whenever you think about the future of humanity, say 200 years out, what does it look like to you?
Uh, wow. Well, let me put it to you this way. 15 years ago, I wouldn't imagine where we are in society today. I mean, things that I thought about, like, well, not even 15 years ago, 20 years ago, I never thought about wristwatches and you could be able to talk into your wristwatch. Because, I mean, I came from a perspective where I used to read a lot of comic books and a lot of comic strips as a kid. So I don't know if you remember this comic strip named Dick Tracy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he used to just talk into his watch, and I was like, man, it would be so great if we had that technology. Or Knight Rider was a show back in the 80s where a self-driving car that goes about 300 miles an hour and can blow everything away. Well, now we've got Tesla, Lucid, all those other things out in the market that can kind of do that, right? Um, but your question, 200 years, man, I see it in a world where AI, if our species does not uh, stop relying on it too much, it can probably be in the vein of the way there's Terminator movies got to be, where ultimately, AI took over and we're at a constant battle, with it. I don't know. It's really difficult to say. I can't. I see the bad part of it and I see the good part of it. So again, I'll put it this way. I'm just going to be cautiously optimistic that it'll be a better world, that we're going to be able to work hand in hand with AI, and the world will progress as a result. But as to what it's going to be, I don't know. Maybe we'll have flying cars. Who knows?
In 200 years, you think we're only still talking about one world or many worlds? Do you think humanity's expanded beyond just the Earth?
Um, well, if you're talking about the immediate planet next door, which would be either Venus, which is way too hot, or our moon, which is, basically has no atmosphere, and then you have Mars, which is probably maybe one of the closest things to us. Um, I could probably see that happening because I know on Venus, for example, I've 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 seen documentaries where they have a certain region of their atmosphere which is which is at the same atmospheric pressure as the Earth. You know, it's at the same, but it's a very thin line. So you can develop cloud cities and go around in airships, but I don't know how reasonable that is. And then you talk about Mars, you know, it's like a big dust like environment, and I've seen things about that. But as far as reaching the exterior of our Milky Way, our galaxy, you know, the rate limiting step is again the speed. We can't even go faster than the speed of light. It takes forever just to get to to Mars. I mean, correct. What is the data about Mars? It takes about what, several months to get there?
About 5 months. Every 26 months, the planets align so that you could make the trip in 5 months.
Right. So unless we have something like warp drive in our thing, I can't see us getting past maybe Mars. You know, if you're talking about in 200 years, I could see potentially Mars, but you'd have to develop a different kind of propulsion system than what we have right now. You know, and again, our propulsion systems are limited to what we have in terms of the resources here on Earth. Um, if you can incorporate some sort of solar thing, or I don't know. Uh, you know, that's the thing. You know, it really relies on the power and the resources you have to get there, you know.
That's true. Yeah, I keep thinking, it feels like we understand the basic foundations of the universe now, that maybe we know everything that there is to know. But it was like only 100 and some odd years ago that we discovered gravitational waves, and
Mhm.
they've just been verified in the last 10 years. And it was just a few 100 years before that that we actually discovered electromagnetism,
You're right.
and which is like so critical to all of our technology, like what we're using right now.
Right.
I just wonder, as we explore out in the space and we have observers who have very different experiences and get asked themselves very different questions and having to reconcile very different sets of facts, if maybe it might shake loose a new perspective that maybe uh, we find something even more fundamental about the universe than what we know now.
Yeah. So I've seen different theories about transport, like wormholes. For example, or even black holes, for example, where light can't even escape. So if you have that kind of suction power to get you propel you that way, I can see that happening, but I don't think something like that's happening. It's kind of a little out there, but whatever. Yeah.
So is the talking watch phone.
Yeah, the talking watch, but that's a lot more plausible though. I mean, a talking watch phone, I can see a big transition. I mean, electronics have gotten, a more compact, right? I mean, the transistor and everything like that. I mean, the chips have gotten so small and more efficient, but energy is still kind of the same, right? Energy is what needs to propel or to create innovation, right? So in order to travel, you have to have a resource with infinite, well, not infinite, but some sort of capacity more than now. That'll go beyond physics to exceed the speed of, you have to go faster than the speed of light, I would imagine.
Mm.
Because humans don't live that long.
Yeah, I mean,
I,
maybe they're asleep for the trip, and there's some way to be preserved in like negative 200 degrees Celsius type of situation, or maybe there are huge ships where people live their entire lives and have children, and they have children, and it's really the great 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 grandchildren that arrive.
yeah, that would be good, but what about the people that are just starting that process? I think it would be a grave disappointment to them. Like, for example, if I wanted to have 3 or 4 generations down from me, but I'd be dead by then. I wouldn't see the results of my labor, So I think sometimes humans are they need immediate satisfaction. And sometimes if you don't have that reinforcing factor where you're seeing results, it's kind of like it seems like it would stunt innovation to a certain degree, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know.
Yeah, I think about these cathedrals that were built over generations
Right.
and what that process is like.
No, that's true. That's true. There was somebody, but as I said, I mean, that is a good point that you make. Yeah, I mean, something like that could happen. But when I think of space exploration, it's so vast. I don't know what we can necessarily do about that. It seems like a very daunting task. But yeah.
Um, if you could, would you take a trip to space?
Oh yeah, for sure I would on somebody else's dime.
Well, what if it
No,
was as cheap as a first class ticket to, say, New Zealand?
I mean, if it was that reasonable, I mean, I wouldn't mind, to do that. Yeah, provided that all the safety measures were in place. But yeah, I would. I would love that. Yeah, and yeah. I mean, minus all the G forces and everything else that takes to get up to that level. But yeah, I would love it.
Well, Linus, that's pretty much all the questions I had. Did you have any questions for me or anything else that you want to talk about for my project?
So I know you've been in this project for a bit. So what is your purpose in the project? Is it more of are you trying to get a lot of opinions and ultimately what is the end goal, I guess, of this? Are you just going to do this every day till you can't do it anymore, or?
Oh, no. I started the project in December of 2019
Uh-huh.
with the specific goal of doing one a day to the end of 2024.
Okay.
And the inspiration for that was in December of 2019, NASA hired a new associate administrator that was
Hmm.
responsible for getting humans back on the moon
Right.
in 2024. And in order to keep everybody kind of focused on that goal, he had a lapel pin that had the number of days to the end of 2024. And he was going around NASA and highlighting a NASA person that was helping to get us to the moon. So I thought, hey, why don't I have a project where I just ask everyday people, non-NASA people, though I've talked to NASA people too, about what they think about us going to the moon and the future of humanity and stuff like that. Because I think this decade is going to be very transformational with terms of space flight. And what I'm really thinking of is SpaceX's Starship that they're building down in Brownsville, which is on the pad, ready to do its second test flight. Uh, I think whenever we have a 100% reusable vehicle like what they're developing down there, and that can launch multiple times per day, they're talking about being able to use the same spacecraft like 3 times a day. And where they plan to manufacture 2 of them per week, where literally you have hundreds of space flights in any given day, transporting people across the world, transporting them to orbit and back, transporting them to the moon and back, transporting them to Mars and back. That that future could actually be something that is foreseeable within before the end of 2030.
So
So
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but you said SpaceX. Now I know Richard Branson's got Virgin Galactic. He has a similar kind of I don't know if it's reusable, but is he making strides with that too?
the thing about Virgin Galactic is they're only looking at these suborbital flights that
Okay.
basically take you up, send you up to a high distance, but not fast enough to actually obtain orbit. So you fall
Okay.
back to the Earth because
Okay.
it's really the speed and not the height that's
Yeah.
important for
Mhm.
being in orbit. So he doesn't really have any vision beyond, um, actual kind of experiences for individuals, that happen in less than an hour. Whereas SpaceX, over half of everything that was launched out last year was launched by SpaceX. Last year they launched, I think it was something like 54 launches.
Mhm.
They've already exceeded that for this year, and there's more than 4 months left. Um, Pretty much everything launched in the U.S. for U.S. companies and the government's done by SpaceX now. ULA's there, but they're still working on their next spacecraft, which isn't ready. Um, and
What about Bezos?
and Bezos, he has visions. He has huge visions, just like Elon has, but he's also only done suborbital flights too. He has developed like rocket engines are going to be used by United Launch Alliance (ULA), um, and they have plans to actually have a completely reusable spacecraft. But the difference is it's really unclear on how much progress Blue Origin's made, because whatever they've been doing has been largely secret, and you actually haven't seen the launches. Whereas SpaceX, very much out in public, and I mean, they just launched their seventh mission to the International Space Station for NASA, in addition to one crewed test flight, and in addition to one sort of private mission. So they've launched, what is that, 9 groups of people to space already, into orbit, for multiple days. And they have Starship actually built and ready for a test flight. So I mean, I would say that SpaceX looks like it has gotten ahead, and it has the vision and the ability to stay ahead.
What about the private versus the public sector? Because NASA, of course, it seems like NASA used to be at the forefront of this, and a lot of private individuals are doing this. Do you ever see this point where private enterprise will ultimately, obliterate NASA's role, and NASA will not be a thing anymore? It'll just be completely, free market, all guns blazing, just private enterprise.
The interesting thing is NASA's never actually really built rockets. They've kind of created the requirements for them, and participated in the design and development of them. But they've always contracted out with Boeing's and Lockheed Martin's and Rocketdyne's and different companies like this. And I think part of the challenge that you have is those companies, sure, they have engineers and some people that are really passionate about space, but at the end of the day, they're there to make money and improve the bottom line. And there's ever incentive to increase the cost, no incentive to reduce the cost, and every incentive to reduce the flight rate, because a rocket on the ground being developed could be hugely profitable with very little risk, whereas a rocket that takes off. So I think SpaceX has really transformed it, because they are looking at really reducing the cost of flight. And these other companies, they had the experience and stuff to do it, but they didn't have the vision or motivation. And
what's the biggest cost in terms of doing this? I mean, this process, is it the materials? Is it the people, or what is the biggest cost for a space mission or something that SpaceX is doing?
Yeah, if you think about it, if you build a spacecraft and you use it for one mission, you have to give back all the money for that spacecraft in that one mission. If you use it one time, you don't know if it works, which means you need to do a whole heck of a lot of testing to make sure that this one rocket that you're going to use this one time is actually going to work.
Right.
Also, on top of that, you're not recovering the flight hardware afterwards. So it could be, kind of having signs of things that potentially will fail, that if you just had the hardware back to look at, you could kind of determine and understand where the weak points are and what you need to do. So reusable spacecraft is like the key to reducing the cost of space, because
I'm sorry to interrupt you again, but it wasn't the space shuttle with NASA going along those lines. But I for some reason, it seemed like NASA, the budget was, I want to say, was it in the red for some years?
Oh, it's been in red for lots of years. But the NASA and the space shuttle, the vision was reusability. The thing, though, is they were unable to really achieve that vision. They had to rebuild the solid rocket boosters. They had to rebuild the external tank, and they had to do so much refurbishment on the space shuttle that it was heavy, at cost. So that was the vision. That was the promise. That was how it was sold to the American public and to Congress, but the reality turned out to be quite a bit different.
Interesting.
Also, another thing is, since the shuttle always launched people, you were very hesitant to make any changes to it because you didn't know if your changes would be significant or not. With SpaceX and Starship, they plan to use it to launch satellites as well as people. So they could be a lot more aggressive in terms of optimization and testing out things on the spacecraft whenever they're launching, cargo to space and satellites to space and probes to other places. And then once they've validated those improvements, then they could apply them to the human vehicles as well, with a greater degree of confidence that it's going to work out well.
And one other question I've got for you, since I'm come from a healthcare perspective, humans, we're very primitive innately, right? I mean, we haven't really changed anatomically in thousands of years, but the technology has, right? So going to an environment that's already harsh and it's not really made for our systems, is there any data that's being collected I mean, I know they do tests on people all the time, but it seems like it really increases your risks for a lot of bad things to happen. Let's put it. So, what's the progress on that right now? I mean, in terms of has technology gotten better? Since the time of the first moon mission to now, like, I mean, is it leaps and bounds better to where, you're protected?
As far as I know, it's not leaps and bounds better. What I think we do know, though, is that the best thing to ward off sort of the ill effects of space is exercise. And I think that's true here on Earth, too. A sedentary lifestyle, one where, and in space is even worse, because the way we challenge ourselves down here by constantly being pulled and having to resist the force that's pulling us down,
Right.
it means that there is definitely a certain level of sort of fitness that we're constantly being challenged to maintain, even at that base level.
Right.
And in free fall, where you don't have to constantly fight against that force that's always pulling you down, you're able to fall much further down in terms of that minimum fitness level. And I think we've been very fortunate that we've sent some of the most healthiest people into space that have been able, that started at a much higher level and able to sustain themselves. And then the second thing is we've learned, like, astronauts at the International Space Station are required to exercise 2 hours a day. Like, it is a requirement. And that is just the minimum necessary to ensure that they're healthy enough,
So this lends a question that comes up. Will space be really democratic then? I mean, I think in order for opportunity to exist, you have to be equally accessible to everyone. So if we're talking about people that aren't fit just because of their physical nature of what they are, or whatever disease that they have, will it truly be fair for them, or even for people that don't have the means or resources necessary to get there? How are we trying to figure that problem out?
I think there are people that are working on that. Obviously, whenever we went to the moon, we had 6 missions land on the moon. We had 12 white men walk on the moon. As part of Artemis, we're sending the first woman and the first person of color. We're also sending the first Canadian on Artemis 2, because they were all 12 of those people were also Americans. So we're getting diversity there too. There are groups of people who are looking at sending people that are physically challenged on, like, zero-G flights. And like Stephen Hawkins actually went on the zero-G flight.
Oh, I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah, and it's really great for somebody that's, like, confined to a wheelchair to actually have the sense of floating. So there's kind of some neat things like that.
Yeah.
But I would say just in the environment that you and I are in here on Earth is not democratic in the ways that you're talking about.
But we
Um,
have no choice, though. We have to be here. It's not so we have to make do. But what I'm saying is, if we're to explore something like that, that's a really we don't really have to be there. I don't think. I mean, it's our choice to do that because it's just in our innate nature to explore and create progress. But I think, that being said, you don't, not everybody has accessibility to that.
hmm.
Like everyone now, pretty much everyone has access to the internet and information, but going to space is another area where you need money, you need health, and whatever else to get up there. Not everybody's like that. So I'm not saying it has to be, the world has got to be fair, but if we have to do that endeavor and we want to make mankind or humankind progress, it should help the vast majority of people. And there are people in every spectrum or every category. And that I don't know how that's going to be addressed or it needs to be addressed. All right.
Yeah, I just wonder how it's addressed in other situations as well. I mean, it's, I mean, people, uh, people all have different abilities and different things that hold them back. And, some of those abilities give us kind of a benefit. But also sometimes overcoming a disadvantage gives those people a benefit as well. Um,
Right.
so it's really challenging. I mean, I I don't think um, I think I think we all have to make choices about sort of uh, what options are realistic for us, and those choices are going to be different than it is for everybody else, just based upon physical attributes, economic, social attributes, and things like this. And I'm not sure we can completely remove those, but I think it makes a lot of sense to not put arbitrary bounds on people, and to limit a competition artificially. I mean, I think competition's good, and I think we should definitely um, structure the competition in a way where we don't say um, we're not going to have people that are blind or don't have people that can't hear, but rather say we're going to make the conversation open to whoever can do this thing the best. And if somebody who would appear to be unable to do that can somehow overcome those limitations and compete with the best of them, then we should recognize that, embrace it, and allow for them to kind of move forward, type
Yeah.
of thing.
Right.
But I mean, I think, kind of like an obvious thing is, historically, there have been certain professions that have been off limit for women, right?
Mhm.
But that was like a social construct and had nothing to do with those individual women's capabilities. And there could have been, in many cases, many women that were much better at that than the men that were selected. An arbitrary kind of uh, limitation there doesn't make sense, type of thing.
Right.
Um, I mean, you should really be testing and selecting based upon the actual skills that you need, as opposed to having like arbitrary litmus tests.
Right.
Anyway, that's kind of like what I think.
Yeah.
So,
No, 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 no.
yeah.
No, I was just curious as to if all those kind of factors are considered because I know private enterprise or when it deals with money or progress, some things are left to the wayside and handled later. But well, it's a work in progress like anything else, right?
Yeah, exactly. And even on the skill-based things, I mean, like rich people can afford to get better medical treatment, better tutors,
Yeah.
better equipment. And these options, even to develop and hone those skills, may not be available to uh, people who don't have those same resources.
Right.
And I think, unfortunately, I think that's a fact we just have to live with. But I don't think we should necessarily say that just because you have all these benefits, you're necessarily going to get the outcomes that you want. And just because you have these disadvantages, you're necessarily going to be prohibited from getting those skills and capabilities. I mean, in fact, maybe you have to be more creative, more resilient, more lots of things that other people who are in apparently easier situations don't. So I don't know. That's it's a difficult thing. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know what produces good people or capable people. I think comfort and ease has a tendency to cause people to be lazy and weak, whereas challenges and hardship makes people have to be more resilient and strong. So anyway.
Yeah. Anyway, that was a lot to say.
Yes. But I mean,
Something
it goes back to the space thing, right? I mean, to a degree, the environment shapes the person, right? I mean, if you're here on Earth, you're going to have a strong lower body. You're going to have a heart that's of a certain strength. You're going to have a certain amount of muscle mass and bone mass.
Right.
You go into continuous free fall, orbiting the Earth, and now your body is not being challenged in those same ways.
Right.
And, you're going to lose bone density. You're going to lose muscle mass. You're going to lose that lower body strength.
Yeah.
And I think the same thing's true with humans and all other environments as well.
Right. That's true. That's true. Well, it is a implicit upon the individual, right? To quote unquote pull themselves up by their bootstraps or whatever. Yeah, I don't know. But anyway, that was a little bit of an off-topic thing, but that was just out of curiosity. I just wanted to see how that was addressed because I haven't really heard about that component.
I mean, one of NASA's goals is to make space accessible to larger and larger groups of people. And one of the ways it sees that needs to do that is to make sure that in its astronaut corps, in its workforce, that there is good representation across all the various groups that you could imagine.
Right.
So, and I think in some ways that strengthens things.
Right.
But anyway.
Of course. Well, I have no further questions, Your Honor.
Well, cool. I got to tell you, I'm actually, I want to see how the inside of this, after we stop the recording and getting the recording from Drive and how that whole process works. But I think Google Meet might be my new go-to. So I'm almost happy.
Well, I've always used Google Meet because the thing is the infrastructure, it's just better. Zoom has always had problems. I think Meet is good. Now, I don't know what the privacy issues about it, but for me, the format is very streamlined.
Yeah, it's a lot better. Very good.
Yeah,
it's very good. Well, let me go ahead and stop the recording. So thank you again for participating in my project before I stop, and then stop.
Yeah. All right. Great.